Welcome back to Drowsy Tales Daily. Tonight I have 36 incredible stories from Reddit that will keep you engaged as you drift off to sleep. From betrayals by trusted friends to workplace deceptions, family manipulations, and shocking discoveries about people's true nature, these real-life situations showcase the complexity of human relationships and moral decision-making. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's dive into tonight's extended collection of compelling moral dilemmas. Our first story comes from a woman who discovered that her best friend had been secretly dating her ex-husband while consoling her through their difficult divorce. The friend had been her primary emotional support during the separation, spending hours listening to her concerns about custody arrangements and financial settlements. However, the woman became suspicious when her friend seemed unusually well-informed about her ex-husband's activities and showed little surprise when he made unexpected decisions about their shared assets. The truth came out when the woman's teenage daughter accidentally mentioned seeing her father with the friend at a restaurant during a time when the friend claimed to be out of town visiting family. Investigation revealed that the relationship had been going on for over 6 months, starting just weeks after the woman had confided in her friend about marital problems. The friend had been using inside information about the divorce proceedings to help the ex-husband hide assets and plan strategy, while pretending to offer neutral emotional support. She had been encouraging the woman to accept unfavorable settlement terms while secretly helping her ex-husband protect his interests. The betrayal was particularly devastating because the friend had been present during some of the most vulnerable moments of the divorce process, offering comfort while simultaneously working against her interests. When confronted, the friend claimed that love couldn't be helped and that she had tried to stay out of the divorce proceedings, but couldn't explain why she had hidden the relationship or why she had provided advice that ultimately benefited the ex-husband. The woman realized that her most trusted confidant had been actively undermining her during one of the most difficult periods of her life. Our second story involves a man who found out that his coworkers had been pooling money to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on him in an attempt to get him fired from his job. The man had been successful in his role as a project manager and had recently received a promotion that several colleagues had also wanted. However, he started noticing strange behavior from his teammates, whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, and questions about his personal life that seemed oddly specific and invasive. The truth came out when the private investigator contacted him directly, explaining that he had been hired to investigate the man's background but couldn't find any wrongdoing and felt uncomfortable continuing the surveillance. Investigation revealed that 5 coworkers had contributed money to hire the investigator, hoping to find evidence of resume fraud, criminal history, or personal scandals that could be used to damage his reputation with management. They had been providing the investigator with his schedule, personal details, and access to his workspace during lunch breaks. The group had been convinced that his rapid advancement must be due to some kind of deception or inappropriate relationship with supervisors, rather than acknowledging his legitimate qualifications and work performance. The investigation had been going on for 2 months and included surveillance of his home, interviews with his neighbors, and attempts to access his financial records. When confronted, the coworkers claimed they were just trying to ensure that promotions were being awarded fairly, but couldn't explain why they had resorted to hiring a private investigator rather than addressing their concerns through proper channels. The man realized that his workplace environment had become toxic due to jealousy and resentment from people he had considered professional colleagues. Our third story comes from a father who discovered that his son's youth soccer referee had been deliberately making bad calls against certain teams whose parents hadn't paid him bribes for favorable treatment. The referee had been officiating games for several years and was known for his strict adherence to rules and professional demeanor during matches. However, the father became suspicious when he noticed a pattern of questionable calls that seemed to consistently favor the same teams while penalizing others for identical actions. The truth came out when another parent accidentally mentioned a conversation about making extra payments to ensure fair officiating for their child's team. Investigation revealed that the referee had been operating a bribery scheme where parents could pay additional fees beyond the normal league costs to guarantee favorable calls during games. He had been particularly targeting competitive games where the outcome would affect playoff positioning or championship opportunities. The referee would use his position of authority to influence game results through selective enforcement of rules, missed calls on obvious fouls, and questionable penalty decisions. Parents who paid the bribes would see their teams benefit from lenient officiating, while teams whose parents refused to participate would face strict enforcement and unfavorable calls. The scheme had been affecting dozens of games over multiple seasons, essentially turning youth sports into a pay-to-win system that taught children that success could be bought rather than earned. Some parents had been pressured to participate in the bribery to avoid disadvantaging their children, while others had unknowingly watched their kids lose games due to corrupt officiating. When confronted, the referee claimed that extra payments were voluntary donations to support youth athletics and that his officiating was always fair and unbiased, but couldn't explain why payment records correlated so closely with favorable call patterns. The father had to involve league administration and law enforcement to investigate the corruption that was undermining the integrity of children's sports. Our fourth story involves a woman who found out that her elderly mother's caregiver had been convincing other family members that the woman was trying to steal her mother's inheritance, while secretly manipulating the elderly woman to change her will in the caregiver's favor. The caregiver had been working with the family for over a year and had initially seemed like a blessing, providing excellent care and becoming a trusted companion to the elderly woman. However, the woman became concerned when her siblings started treating her with suspicion and making accusations about her financial motivations for visiting their mother. Investigation revealed that the caregiver had been systematically poisoning family relationships by telling different family members conflicting stories about each other's intentions and actions. She had been claiming that the woman was pressuring their mother about money, while telling other siblings that the woman was trying to exclude them from inheritance decisions. Meanwhile, the caregiver had been positioning herself as the only person who truly cared about the elderly woman's well-being and gradually convincing her to make legal changes that would benefit the caregiver financially. She had been isolating the elderly woman from family members by claiming they were causing her stress and only visiting when they wanted something. The manipulation had been sophisticated and persistent, taking advantage of the elderly woman's increasing dependence on the caregiver for daily activities and social interaction. The caregiver had been researching family dynamics and using her insider knowledge to create believable conflicts that turned family members against each other. When the woman finally managed to have private conversations with her siblings, they realized they had all been told different versions of the same false stories designed to create mistrust and division. The family discovered that their mother had already signed documents giving the caregiver significant control over her finances and healthcare decisions, based entirely on fabricated information about her children's intentions. They had to involve elder abuse authorities and hire legal help to protect their mother from financial exploitation and restore family relationships that had been deliberately damaged by the caregiver's manipulation. Our fifth story comes from a college student who discovered that his roommate had been stealing his identity to apply for credit cards and loans, using the shared living situation to intercept mail and gather personal information. The roommate had been friendly and helpful since they started living together, often offering to collect mail and handle administrative tasks around their apartment. However, the student became suspicious when he started receiving calls from debt collectors about accounts he had never opened. Investigation revealed that the roommate had been using the student's personal information to apply for multiple credit cards, taking advantage of their shared address to intercept approval letters and credit cards before the student could see them. He had been making small purchases initially to avoid detection, but had gradually escalated to larger transactions and cash advances. The roommate had access to personal documents that the student kept in their shared living space, including social security cards, bank statements, and other sensitive information needed for credit applications. He had been particularly careful to target accounts that wouldn't send statements to their shared address, instead using online banking and electronic statements to hide his activities. The identity theft had been going on for over 6 months and had resulted in thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt being assigned to the student's credit report. Some of the stolen money had been used to pay for shared expenses like groceries and utilities, making the student an unwitting beneficiary of his own identity theft. When confronted with evidence from credit reports and bank statements, the roommate claimed he had been trying to help improve the student's credit score and that he had planned to pay everything back before the student found out. However, investigation revealed that he had no means to repay the debt and had been planning to move out at the end of the semester, leaving the student responsible for all the fraudulent accounts. The student had to file police reports, work with credit agencies to dispute fraudulent accounts, and deal with the long-term consequences of having his credit destroyed by someone he had trusted as a friend. Our sixth story involves a woman who found out that her wedding photographer had been using a more experienced photographer's portfolio to book weddings, then showing up himself with minimal equipment and skills to actually shoot the events. The woman had spent months researching photographers and had chosen this one based on an impressive online portfolio that showcased beautiful, professional wedding photography. However, on her wedding day, she was shocked when the photographer arrived with basic equipment and seemed unfamiliar with standard wedding photography practices. Investigation revealed that the photographer had been using stolen images from multiple professional photographers' websites to create a fake portfolio that misrepresented his actual abilities and experience. He had been booking weddings at premium prices based on the quality of work he was claiming as his own, then providing substandard photography services that didn't match the promised results. The photographer had been particularly targeting couples who booked far in advance, counting on them not discovering the deception until their wedding day when it would be too late to find a replacement. He had been using basic photography equipment and had minimal training, resulting in poor quality images that were often blurry, poorly composed, or missed important moments entirely. The scheme had been affecting multiple couples over several months, with many discovering only after their weddings that their photographer had misrepresented his capabilities. Some couples had received wedding photos that were so poor they couldn't be used for albums or sharing with family and friends, essentially leaving them without professional documentation of their special day. When confronted, the photographer claimed that all photographers used inspiration from other work and that wedding photography was unpredictable, but couldn't explain why his actual portfolio was so different from the work he had shown to potential clients. The woman had to warn other couples who had booked with the photographer and work with them to demand refunds for services that didn't match what had been promised. Our seventh story comes from a man who discovered that his personal trainer had been secretly adding supplements to his protein shakes that contained substances banned by his sports governing body, potentially destroying his competitive athletic career. The trainer had been working with the man for over a year, helping him prepare for competitive events and providing nutrition guidance and supplement recommendations. However, the man became concerned when he was randomly selected for drug testing by his sports governing body and was told that prohibited substances had been found in his system. Investigation revealed that the trainer had been secretly adding performance-enhancing substances to protein shakes and other supplements, without the athlete's knowledge or consent. The trainer had been telling the man that he was providing all-natural supplements and nutrition support, while actually giving him substances that would enhance performance, but were prohibited in competitive sports. The trainer had been motivated by the desire to see quick results that would build his reputation as an effective coach, rather than considering the long-term consequences for his client's career and reputation. The supplements had been added in small amounts that were designed to provide performance benefits while hopefully avoiding detection in drug tests. But the testing had become more sophisticated and had caught the prohibited substances. The man faced potential suspension from his sport, loss of sponsorship deals, and damage to his reputation as a clean athlete, all because his trainer had been secretly drugging him. Some of the substances that had been added were not only banned in sports but could also have health consequences that the trainer had never discussed or considered. When confronted, the trainer claimed he was just trying to help the man reach his full potential and that many athletes used similar supplements, but couldn't explain why he had hidden the true contents of what he was providing or why he had never mentioned the potential consequences for competitive athletics. The man had to hire lawyers to fight the charges against him and prove that he had been unknowingly given prohibited substances by someone he trusted to support his career ethically. Our eighth story involves a woman who found out that her child's teacher had been giving her daughter lower grades than she deserved because of personal conflicts with the woman's parenting style and family situation. The teacher had seemed professional during parent-teacher conferences and had never expressed any concerns about the child's academic performance or behavior. However, the woman became suspicious when her daughter's grades suddenly dropped despite her continued effort and strong performance on standardized tests. Investigation revealed that the teacher had been allowing personal bias against the family to influence her grading and treatment of the child in class. The teacher disapproved of the woman being a single mother and had been making assumptions about the child's home life and future prospects that affected how she evaluated the student's work. She had been grading the child's assignments more harshly than identical work from other students and had been providing less support and encouragement during class activities. The teacher had also been documenting negative observations about the child's behavior and academic potential that were inconsistent with the child's actual performance and attitude. The bias had been affecting not only grades, but also the child's confidence and enjoyment of school, as she struggled to understand why her efforts weren't being recognized or rewarded. Some of the teacher's comments and evaluations seemed designed to support a narrative that children from single-parent homes were destined to struggle academically, rather than being based on objective assessment of the child's abilities and progress. When the woman requested to review grading rubrics and compare her daughter's work to other students' assignments, the disparities became obvious and undeniable. The teacher claimed that she maintained high standards for all students and that the woman was being overly protective, but couldn't explain why identical work received different grades or why her written evaluations seemed to focus on family structure rather than academic performance. The woman had to involve school administration to address the discrimination and ensure that her daughter received fair treatment and accurate assessment of her academic abilities. Our ninth story comes from a father who discovered that his teenage son's driving instructor had been taking bribes from parents to pass students who hadn't actually demonstrated safe driving skills. The instructor had been working with the driving school for several years and had a reputation for being thorough and maintaining high safety standards. However, the father became concerned when his son mentioned that other students had passed their driving tests despite clearly lacking basic driving skills and knowledge of traffic laws. Investigation revealed that the instructor had been operating a bribery scheme where parents could pay additional fees to guarantee that their children would pass driving tests regardless of their actual abilities. He had been particularly targeting families who seemed wealthy or desperate to get their children driving privileges quickly for work or school reasons. The instructor had been providing passing grades for students who couldn't parallel park, didn't understand right-of-way rules, or had poor control of their vehicles during basic maneuvers. Some students had been passed despite failing to demonstrate emergency procedures, proper signaling, or safe highway driving that were supposed to be required for licensing. The scheme had been putting dangerous drivers on the road who lacked the skills and knowledge necessary to operate vehicles safely, potentially creating hazards for other drivers and pedestrians. Parents who paid the bribes believed they were helping their children, but were actually putting them at risk by allowing them to drive without proper preparation. When the father investigated further, he discovered that several recent accidents involving teenage drivers could be traced to students who had passed tests through this corrupt instructor. The instructor claimed that driving tests were subjective and that he gave students the benefit of the doubt when their performance was borderline, but couldn't explain why payment records correlated so closely with passing rates among obviously unprepared students. The father had to involve both the driving school administration and state licensing authorities to investigate the corruption that was compromising road safety. Our 10th story involves a woman who found out that her financial advisor had been steering her investments toward funds that paid him higher commissions, while telling her he was selecting the best options for her financial goals. The advisor had been managing her portfolio for over 3 years and had presented himself as a fiduciary who would always prioritize her interests over his own profits. However, the woman became suspicious when she compared her investment returns to market averages and realized she was consistently underperforming despite paying substantial management fees. Investigation revealed that the advisor had been recommending investment products based primarily on the commission payments he would receive rather than their potential performance or suitability for her financial situation. He had been steering her money toward actively managed funds with high expense ratios and poor track records, while avoiding low-cost index funds that would have provided better returns but lower commissions. The advisor had been using technical language and complex explanations to obscure the fact that his recommendations were serving his financial interests rather than hers. He had also been churning her account by frequently buying and selling investments to generate additional transaction fees, claiming that active management was necessary to respond to market conditions. The strategy had cost the woman thousands of dollars in unnecessary fees and poor investment performance over several years, significantly impacting her retirement savings and financial security. Some of the investments he had recommended were so clearly inappropriate for her risk tolerance and time horizon that it was obvious his selections were driven by commission opportunities rather than professional judgment. When confronted with evidence of the conflicts of interest and poor performance, the advisor claimed that investing was unpredictable and that his active management had protected her from worse losses, but couldn't explain why his recommendations consistently favored high-commission products over better-performing alternatives. The woman had to transfer her investments to a fee-only advisor and file complaints with financial regulators to address the breach of fiduciary duty that had damaged her long-term financial prospects. Our 11th story comes from a man who discovered that his neighbor had been using his wireless internet connection for over 2 years while claiming his own service was temporarily disconnected. The neighbor had approached him during what he said was a brief internet outage, asking to borrow Wi-Fi access just until his service could be restored. However, the man became suspicious when he noticed that his internet speeds had been consistently slow and his data usage seemed unusually high for his actual consumption. Investigation revealed that the neighbor had been using the shared password for extensive streaming, gaming, and downloading that was consuming most of the available bandwidth and exceeding data limits. The neighbor had never had his own internet service restored and had been essentially freeloading off the man's connection while paying nothing for unlimited access. He had been particularly heavy usage during peak hours when the man needed reliable internet for work, causing connectivity issues and reduced performance. The neighbor had been using the connection for activities that could potentially create legal liability for the man, including downloading copyrighted content and accessing websites that might violate terms of service. Some of the usage had been so excessive that it triggered warnings from the internet service provider about abnormal data consumption and potential policy violations. When the man checked his account history, he realized he had been paying hundreds of dollars in overage fees and upgrade costs to accommodate usage that wasn't even his own. The neighbor claimed he was grateful for the temporary help and had been planning to get his own service restored soon. But investigation revealed that he had been telling the same story to other neighbors and had never actually attempted to establish his own internet connection. The man had to change his Wi-Fi password and warn other neighbors about the neighbor's pattern of taking advantage of people's generosity for long-term freeloading. Our 12th story involves a woman who found out that her sister had been intercepting and opening packages delivered to her house, keeping items she wanted and claiming that deliveries had been stolen by porch pirates. The sister had been house-sitting during the woman's business trips and had volunteered to collect mail and packages to keep them secure. However, the woman became suspicious when several expensive orders showed as delivered but were missing when she returned home. Investigation revealed that the sister had been systematically opening packages to see what was inside, keeping anything she found valuable or interesting, and then claiming that the packages had been stolen from the porch. She had been particularly targeting packages from clothing retailers, electronics stores, and cosmetics companies, essentially using her sister's online shopping as her own personal shopping service. The sister had been resealing packages that contained items she didn't want and leaving them for her sister to find, while completely disposing of evidence from packages containing items she kept. She had been encouraging her sister to file theft reports with shipping companies and retailers to get replacement items or refunds, essentially doubling the loss from her stealing. The theft had been going on for over 6 months and had included hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise that the sister had kept for herself or given as gifts to other people. Some of the stolen items had been Christmas and birthday presents that the woman had ordered for family members, meaning that the sister had been stealing gifts that were meant for other relatives. When confronted with evidence, including opened packages and items found in the sister's possession, she claimed that packages had been delivered already opened and that she was just trying to protect valuable items from being stolen by strangers. However, she couldn't explain why she had never mentioned finding open packages or why she had kept items instead of telling her sister about the supposed tampering. The woman realized that her trust in family members to protect her property and privacy had been completely violated by someone who was supposed to be helping her. Our 13th story comes from a father who discovered that his daughter's gymnastics coach had been requiring private lessons at inflated rates as a condition for remaining on the competitive team, essentially running an extortion scheme targeting dedicated young athletes. The coach had been working with the gym for several years and had a reputation for developing successful competitive gymnasts who won regional and state competitions. However, the father became suspicious when he was told that his daughter needed additional private coaching to maintain her position on the team, despite her strong performance and dedication during regular practice sessions. Investigation revealed that the coach had been systematically pressuring parents to pay for expensive private lessons by threatening to remove children from competitive teams or reduce their opportunities for advancement. She had been claiming that private lessons were necessary for skill development and team placement, when actually they were just a way for her to generate additional income beyond her regular coaching salary. The coach had been particularly targeting families who were heavily invested in their children's gymnastics careers and who would be willing to pay extra to avoid disappointing their young athletes. She had been creating artificial skill requirements and performance standards that could supposedly only be met through private coaching, rather than through the regular team practice sessions that parents were already paying for. The scheme had been affecting dozens of families over several years, with some parents paying thousands of dollars in additional coaching fees based on fabricated requirements. Some families had gone into debt or made significant financial sacrifices to afford the private lessons they were told were essential for their children's success. When parents began comparing notes and questioning the necessity of private lessons, the coach claimed that she was just trying to provide the best possible training for serious athletes, but couldn't explain why team placement seemed to correlate more closely with private lesson participation than with actual skill level or performance. The father had to work with other parents to document the extortion scheme and file complaints with both gym management and youth sports oversight organizations. Our 14th story involves a woman who found out that her hair stylist had been deliberately damaging her hair with inappropriate chemical treatments so that she would need to return more frequently for corrective services and expensive conditioning treatments. The stylist had been working with her for over a year and had gradually convinced her to try more adventurous colors and treatments that required regular maintenance and professional care. However, the woman became suspicious when her hair condition continued to deteriorate despite expensive treatments, and when other stylists commented that her hair showed signs of chemical damage that seemed excessive for the procedures she had requested. Investigation revealed that the stylist had been using stronger chemicals than necessary and leaving them on longer than recommended to create damage that would require ongoing corrective treatments. She had been telling the woman that her hair was naturally difficult to work with and that frequent professional treatments were necessary to maintain healthy hair, when actually the damage was being caused by the stylist's deliberately harsh techniques. The stylist had been recommending expensive protein treatments, deep conditioning services, and protective styling that were supposed to repair damage that she was secretly causing during each appointment. She had been particularly targeting clients who trusted her expertise and who were willing to pay premium prices for supposedly advanced treatments and hair care services. The scheme had been affecting multiple clients over several years, with some experiencing significant hair loss and damage that required months or years to repair properly. Some clients had been convinced to cut their hair much shorter than desired because of damage that the stylist had created through inappropriate chemical processing. When the woman consulted with other hair professionals, they confirmed that her hair damage was consistent with deliberate overprocessing and improper technique rather than natural hair characteristics or normal treatment side effects. The stylist claimed that some hair types were more prone to damage and that aggressive treatments were sometimes necessary to achieve desired results, but couldn't explain why her clients seemed to experience damage at much higher rates than clients of other stylists. The woman had to find a new stylist who could help repair the damage and warn other clients about the deliberate sabotage of their hair health. Our 15th story comes from a man who discovered that his business partner had been creating fake customer reviews and testimonials to inflate their company's online reputation while simultaneously posting negative reviews about their competitors under false identities. The partner had been responsible for marketing and online presence while the man focused on operations and customer service. However, the man became suspicious when he noticed that their online reviews seemed unusually positive and often contained similar language and phrasing that didn't match the way real customers typically described their experiences. Investigation revealed that the partner had been creating dozens of fake accounts across multiple review platforms to post glowing reviews about their business, often copying and pasting templates with minor variations to make them appear authentic. He had also been systematically targeting their competitors by posting negative reviews that highlighted problems and complaints that seemed designed to drive customers away from other businesses and toward their company. The partner had been spending significant amounts of time and energy on this deceptive marketing strategy instead of focusing on legitimate business development and customer satisfaction. Some of the fake positive reviews had been used to cover up real customer complaints and problems, creating a false impression of the company's performance and reliability. The negative reviews about competitors had included false accusations about service quality, pricing, and business practices that could constitute defamation and unfair business competition. When potential customers researched the company and its competitors, they were making decisions based on fabricated information rather than authentic customer experiences and genuine business reputations. The partner claimed that online marketing required creativity and that all businesses engaged in reputation management, but couldn't explain why he had created false identities or why he had made specific false claims about competitors. The man realized that his company's apparent success was built on deception that could result in legal liability and damage to their reputation if discovered by customers or competitors. Our 16th story involves a woman who found out that her elderly father's financial planner had been gradually transferring money from his retirement accounts into investments that benefited the planner's other business interests, while claiming to diversify his portfolio for better returns. The planner had been working with her father for over 5 years and had earned his complete trust through regular meetings and detailed reports about investment performance and market conditions. However, the woman became concerned when she noticed that her father's account statement showed investments in companies and funds that seemed unusual for someone his age with his conservative risk tolerance. Investigation revealed that the planner had been steering her father's money toward business ventures that the planner was personally involved in, including real estate developments, startup companies, and high-risk investments that provided kickbacks or ownership shares to the planner. He had been using complex financial language and fake market analysis to justify these investments while hiding his personal financial interest in their success or failure. The planner had been particularly targeting elderly clients who trusted his expertise and who were unlikely to research investment details independently or seek second opinions about their portfolio management. Some of the investments had been complete failures that resulted in significant losses to her father's retirement savings, while others were performing poorly compared to standard retirement investment options. The scheme had been affecting multiple elderly clients over several years, with the planner essentially using their retirement funds as personal investment capital for his own business ventures. When the woman demanded detailed documentation of all investments and fee structures, the planner became defensive and claimed that sophisticated investment strategies were difficult for non-professionals to understand. However, investigation revealed that many of the investments violated fiduciary duty standards and that the planner had been earning profits from his clients' money without disclosing his conflicts of interest. The woman had to hire an independent financial analyst to evaluate her father's portfolio and file complaints with securities regulators to address the breach of trust that had endangered her father's financial security. Our 17th story comes from a college student who discovered that his study group leader had been sharing their group's research and study materials with students from competing universities, essentially selling their collaborative work to help other schools gain advantages in academic competitions. The study group had been working together for an entire semester, pooling their research and creating comprehensive study guides for advanced courses in their major. However, the student became suspicious when he recognized some of their group's specific research findings and unique analysis and presentations given by students from rival universities during academic conferences. Investigation revealed that the group leader had been photographing and copying all of their collaborative materials, then selling them to students at other universities who were working on similar projects or preparing for the same academic competitions. He had been marketing their group's work as premium study materials and research assistants, charging hundreds of dollars for access to information that had been created through their collective effort. The group leader had been particularly targeting universities that were known competitors in their field, essentially giving their academic rivals insider information about their research approaches and findings. Some of the shared materials had included early drafts of research papers and project proposals that other universities could use to develop competing work or to anticipate their strategies. The scheme had been affecting multiple study groups over several academic years, with the leader building a reputation as someone who could provide high-quality academic materials to students who were struggling with difficult coursework. When the student confronted other group members about the theft of their intellectual property, they realized that their collaborative work had been systematically exploited for the leader's financial gain. The group leader claimed that study materials were meant to be shared, and that academic collaboration was beneficial for all students, but couldn't explain why he had been charging money for work that wasn't his own or why he had hidden his activities from the group members who had created the materials. The student had to report the academic fraud to university administration and work with his group to protect their remaining research from further exploitation. Our 18th story involves a woman who found out that her wedding caterer had been serving lower quality food than what was specified in their contract while charging premium prices for supposedly gourmet cuisine and organic ingredients. The caterer had an impressive reputation and had provided detailed menus and ingredient lists that justified their high pricing for what was supposed to be an upscale dining experience. However, the woman became suspicious when several guests commented that the food quality seemed inconsistent with the promised menu, and when she noticed that some dishes were clearly made with ingredients that didn't match what had been contracted. Investigation revealed that the caterer had been systematically substituting cheaper ingredients while keeping the premium pricing and menu descriptions that attracted high-end clients. He had been using conventional produce instead of organic, lower-grade meats instead of premium cuts, and packaged sauces instead of the made-from-scratch items that were featured in his marketing materials. The caterer had been counting on event hosts being too busy and distracted during their celebrations to notice the substitutions, and on guests being too polite to complain about food quality during special occasions. Some of the ingredient substitutions had affected guests with food allergies and dietary restrictions who had been assured that their needs would be accommodated with specific high-quality ingredients. The scheme had been affecting multiple events over several years, with the caterer building a reputation for elegant cuisine while actually providing much more basic food service at premium prices. When the woman demanded to see receipts and invoices for the ingredients that were supposed to have been used for her wedding, the caterer became evasive and claimed that menu flexibility was necessary to accommodate seasonal availability and market conditions. However, comparison with other caterers and food service providers revealed that the quality and cost of ingredients used were far below what had been promised and paid for. The woman had to pursue legal action to recover the difference between what she had paid for and what had actually been provided, while warning other couples about the deceptive practices that had compromised their special events. Our 19th story comes from a father who discovered that his son's private tutor had been using their tutoring sessions to recruit the boy for a multi-level marketing scheme, essentially exploiting the trust and access that came with the educational relationship. The tutor had been working with the family for several months and had initially provided good academic support that helped improve the boy's grades in mathematics. However, the father became concerned when his son started asking questions about business opportunities and mentioned that his tutor had been discussing ways to make money through sales and recruitment. Investigation revealed that the tutor had been gradually introducing multi-level marketing concepts during tutoring sessions, presenting them as lessons about business and entrepreneurship rather than acknowledging that he was trying to recruit a minor into his sales organization. He had been using his position of authority and trust to influence the boy's thinking about money and success, essentially grooming him to become a participant in a scheme that could exploit his family's social connections. The tutor had been providing the boy with marketing materials and encouraging him to talk to family members about business opportunities, effectively using the child as a sales representative to access potential recruits among parents and relatives. Some of the recruitment activities had involved asking the boy to collect contact information from family friends and to attend sales presentations that were disguised as educational workshops. The scheme violated professional boundaries between tutors and students and potentially exposed the family to financial risks and social embarrassment if the boy had continued to promote the multi-level marketing program to their social network. When the father confronted the tutor about mixing business recruitment with academic instruction, the tutor claimed he was just teaching valuable lessons about entrepreneurship and financial literacy. However, investigation revealed that he had been using nearly identical recruitment approaches with other tutoring clients, and that his focus had shifted from academic support to business development through exploitation of his access to families. The father had to terminate the tutoring relationship and warn other parents about the inappropriate use of educational services for recruitment and sales activities. Our 20th story involves a woman who found out that her gym's personal trainer had been taking before and after photos of clients without permission and using them in his marketing materials and social media posts to promote his training services. The trainer had been working with clients at the gym for over 2 years and had built a strong reputation for helping people achieve their fitness goals through personalized workout programs. However, the woman became suspicious when a friend sent her a screenshot of herself from the trainer's social media account, showing her at the beginning of her fitness journey without her knowledge or consent. Investigation revealed that the trainer had been secretly photographing clients during their workouts and progress assessments, then using these images to create dramatic transformation stories that promoted his personal training business. He had been taking particular advantage of clients who had achieved significant fitness improvements, using their success stories as marketing material without offering them any compensation or even informing them about the usage. The trainer had been editing and cropping photos to maximize the dramatic impact of before and after comparisons, sometimes using photos taken months apart to create the impression of faster results than were actually achieved. Some of the photos had been taken in vulnerable moments when clients were sweating, struggling with exercises, or feeling self-conscious about their appearance and fitness level. The unauthorized use of client images had been helping the trainer attract new customers and build his personal brand while exploiting the privacy and dignity of people who trusted him with their fitness journeys. When the woman demanded that her photos be removed from his marketing materials, the trainer claimed that transformation stories were inspirational and that clients should be proud to showcase their achievements. However, he couldn't produce signed releases or evidence of consent for any of the photos he had been using. An investigation revealed that he had been deliberately taking photos without client knowledge to avoid having to ask permission or pay for usage rights. The woman had to involve gym management and file complaints with state privacy regulators to address the unauthorized commercial use of her image and help other clients understand their rights regarding photo usage. Our 21st story comes from a man who discovered that his apartment building's property manager had been charging tenants for maintenance and repairs that were never actually performed, while pocketing the money and allowing building conditions to deteriorate. The manager had been sending monthly notices about building improvements and maintenance projects that justified increases in rent and special assessments for all tenants. However, the man became suspicious when he noticed that problems he had reported months earlier were still unresolved, despite being charged for repairs that supposedly addressed those issues. Investigation revealed that the manager had been creating fake invoices and work orders for maintenance projects that existed only on paper, while collecting payment from tenants for services that were never provided. She had been particularly creative in describing plumbing upgrades, electrical improvements, and structural repairs that sounded legitimate but had never actually been scheduled or completed. The manager had been taking advantage of tenants' busy schedules and general unfamiliarity with building maintenance to avoid questions about the progress and quality of supposed improvement projects. Some of the fake repairs had been related to safety issues like fire alarm systems and emergency lighting that could put tenants at serious risk if they believed these systems had been updated and maintained when they actually hadn't. The scheme had been affecting multiple buildings under the manager's control over several years, generating thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges while allowing property conditions to decline due to lack of actual maintenance. When tenants began comparing notes and requesting documentation of completed work, the manager became evasive and claimed that maintenance records were confidential and that questioning her management decisions showed a lack of trust. However, investigation revealed that she had been using the stolen maintenance money for personal expenses while ignoring legitimate repair needs that were causing problems for tenants. The man had to organize other tenants to demand accountability and involve both building ownership and local housing authorities to investigate the fraud that was affecting their living conditions and safety. Our 22nd story involves a woman who found out that her child's school counselor had been sharing confidential information about students' family situations and personal problems with other parents in the community, essentially running a gossip network using privileged information. The counselor had been working at the school for several years and was trusted by students and families to provide emotional support and guidance while maintaining strict confidentiality about sensitive personal matters. However, the woman became concerned when other parents began making comments that showed they knew private details about her family's financial struggles and her child's anxiety issues that had only been discussed in counseling sessions. Investigation revealed that the counselor had been systematically violating professional ethics by sharing students' personal information with parents who were part of her social circle, treating confidential counseling sessions as sources of community gossip. She had been particularly careless about sharing information about family problems, mental health issues, and academic struggles that students had trusted her to keep private. The counselor had been using her access to sensitive information to build social relationships with other parents, essentially trading student privacy for personal social benefits and insider knowledge about community families. Some of the shared information had been used by other parents to make judgments about families and to influence their children's friendships and social relationships based on private counseling disclosures. The breach of confidentiality had been affecting multiple students over several years, potentially damaging their trust in mental health services and their willingness to seek help for emotional and academic problems. When the woman confronted the counselor about the privacy violations, she claimed that she was just trying to build community support for families who were struggling and that sharing general concerns showed she cared about student welfare. However, the information being shared was far too specific and personal to be considered general community support, and she couldn't explain why she had never asked permission or informed families that their private information might be discussed with others. The woman had to file complaints with both school administration and professional licensing boards to address the breach of trust that was compromising students' access to confidential counseling services. Our 23rd story comes from a father who discovered that his teenage daughter's part-time job supervisor had been requiring her to work unpaid overtime hours and threatening to fire her if she complained about wage violations or unsafe working conditions. The supervisor had been managing the retail store where his daughter worked after school and weekends, and had initially seemed supportive of young workers who were gaining their first employment experience. However, the father became concerned when his daughter mentioned working much longer hours than she was being paid for, and when she seemed stressed about conflicts with management over scheduling and work requirements. Investigation revealed that the supervisor had been systematically exploiting teenage employees by requiring them to work beyond their scheduled hours without additional compensation, knowing that young workers were unlikely to understand their rights or challenge authority figures. She had been using threats about job references and future employment opportunities to pressure teenagers into accepting illegal working conditions and wage violations. The supervisor had been particularly targeting students whose families needed the income and who couldn't afford to lose their jobs, essentially using economic pressure to exploit child labor. Some of the unpaid work had involved dangerous tasks like handling cleaning chemicals and operating equipment that teenage workers weren't supposed to use according to safety regulations and labor laws. The scheme had been affecting multiple teenage employees over several years, with the supervisor essentially running a business model based on exploiting young workers who didn't know how to protect themselves. When the father investigated further, he discovered that other parents had noticed similar problems but had been hesitant to complain because their children needed the jobs and experience. The supervisor claimed that teenagers needed to learn about work ethic and responsibility, and that occasional overtime was part of gaining valuable employment experience. However, she couldn't explain why overtime work wasn't being compensated according to labor laws or why safety protocols were being ignored for convenience and cost savings. The father had to involve state labor authorities and work with other parents to document the exploitation that was taking advantage of vulnerable young workers. Our 24th story involves a woman who found out that her veterinarian had been performing unnecessary medical procedures on her pets and recommending expensive treatments that weren't actually needed, essentially using her emotional attachment to her animals to generate fraudulent revenue. The veterinarian had been caring for her pets for over 3 years and had built a reputation for thorough examinations and preventive care that kept animals healthy and comfortable. However, the woman became suspicious when her pet care costs seemed unusually high compared to other pet owners, and when her animals continued to have health problems despite expensive treatments and procedures. Investigation revealed that the veterinarian had been recommending and performing medical procedures that weren't actually necessary based on the animal's symptoms and test results, instead using emotional manipulation to convince pet owners to authorize expensive treatments. He had been particularly targeting pet owners who were elderly, emotionally vulnerable, or who had strong emotional bonds with their animals and would authorize expensive care without questioning medical necessity. The veterinarian had been using fear tactics about potential health problems and suffering to pressure pet owners into agreeing to procedures that generated significant revenue while providing little or no medical benefit. Some of the unnecessary procedures had actually caused stress and discomfort for the animals while exposing them to surgical risks that weren't justified by their actual health conditions. The scheme had been affecting multiple pet owners over several years, with the veterinarian essentially using people's love for their animals as a way to generate fraudulent income through unnecessary medical care. When the woman sought second opinions from other veterinarians, they confirmed that many of the procedures and treatments had been inappropriate and that her pet's health problems could have been managed much more conservatively. The veterinarian claimed that he was providing comprehensive care and that pet health required proactive treatment to prevent more serious problems, but couldn't explain why his treatment recommendations were so different from other veterinary professionals or why expensive procedures hadn't resolved the health issues they were supposed to address. The woman had to find a new veterinarian who could provide honest assessment of her pet's needs and file complaints with veterinary licensing boards to address the fraud that was exploiting people's emotional bonds with their animals. Our 25th story comes from a man who discovered that his elderly mother's companion caregiver had been isolating her from family members and friends while gradually convincing her to make financial gifts and change legal documents in the caregiver's favor. The caregiver had been providing excellent personal care and companionship for over a year and had initially seemed like a blessing for the family who were concerned about the elderly woman's safety and loneliness. However, the man became concerned when his mother seemed increasingly reluctant to see family members and when she started making unusual comments about her children being too busy to care about her. Investigation revealed that the caregiver had been systematically poisoning the elderly woman's relationships with family and friends by claiming that they were taking advantage of her, didn't really care about her well-being, and were only interested in her money. She had been intercepting phone calls and visits, claiming that the elderly woman was too tired or unwell to see people, while gradually positioning herself as the only person who truly cared about the woman's needs. The caregiver had been encouraging the elderly woman to make financial gifts and legal changes by claiming that her family was planning to take control of her money and put her in a nursing home against her will. Some of the manipulation had involved creating false emergencies and medical scares that made the elderly woman feel dependent on the caregiver's support and protection. The scheme had been designed to gradually transfer the elderly woman's assets and legal authority to the caregiver while destroying her relationships with people who actually loved her and wanted to protect her interests. When the man finally managed to have a private conversation with his mother, he realized that she had been completely deceived about her family's intentions and had been making financial and legal decisions based on fabricated fears and false information. The caregiver claimed that she was protecting the elderly woman from family members who were causing her stress, and that the gifts and legal changes reflected the woman's own wishes and preferences. However, investigation revealed that the elderly woman's personality and attitudes had changed dramatically since the caregiver's arrival, and that her decisions were based on false information rather than her actual understanding of her family relationships. The man had to involve elder abuse authorities and legal professionals to protect his mother from financial exploitation and restore family relationships that had been deliberately damaged. Our 26th story involves a woman who found out that her teenager's private college consultant had been taking bribes from certain colleges to steer students toward those institutions, regardless of whether they were good fits for the student's academic goals and interests. The consultant had been working with her family for over a year, helping her daughter navigate the complex college application process and providing guidance about school selection and application strategies. However, the woman became suspicious when the consultant seemed to consistently recommend the same small group of colleges regardless of students' different interests, academic strengths, and career goals. Investigation revealed that the consultant had been receiving substantial payments from certain colleges in exchange for directing students to apply and enroll at those institutions, essentially selling student placement for personal profit. She had been using her position of trust and expertise to influence major life decisions that would affect students' educational and career opportunities for years to come. The consultant had been particularly aggressive in promoting colleges that paid the highest commissions, sometimes discouraging students from considering institutions that would have been better fits for their academic and personal needs. Some students had been steered toward colleges with weaker programs in their areas of interest or toward institutions that were more expensive than necessary, all because those schools provided better financial incentives for the consultant. The scheme had been affecting dozens of families over several years, with students making college choices based on the consultant's financial interests rather than their own educational needs and goals. When the woman demanded to see documentation of the consultant's relationships with recommended colleges, she became evasive and claimed that her recommendations were based purely on professional expertise and knowledge of admissions requirements. However, investigation revealed financial agreements between the consultant and several colleges that clearly created conflicts of interest in her advice to students and families. The woman had to warn other families about the consultant's financial motivations and help her daughter reconsider college choices based on unbiased information about academic programs and institutional fit. Our 27th story comes from a father who discovered that his son's youth basketball coach had been selling spots on the team to parents who were willing to pay extra fees, while benching more talented players whose families couldn't afford the additional payments. The coach had been working with the youth league for several years and had a reputation for developing competitive teams that performed well in regional tournaments. However, the father became suspicious when he noticed that playing time seemed to correlate more closely with family wealth than with athletic ability or practice performance. Investigation revealed that the coach had been operating a pay-to-play scheme where parents could guarantee their children's positions on the team and playing time during games by making substantial payments beyond the normal league fees. He had been telling parents that extra payments were for additional coaching, equipment, and travel expenses, when actually they were bribes to ensure favorable treatment for their children. The coach had been benching skilled players whose families couldn't afford the extra payments, while giving significant playing time to less talented players whose parents had paid for guaranteed positions. Some of the most dedicated and talented young athletes had been excluded from tournaments and showcase games because their families couldn't meet the coach's financial demands. The scheme had been affecting multiple teams over several years, essentially turning youth athletics into a system where success was determined by family wealth rather than athletic ability and dedication. When the father investigated further, he discovered that some parents had gone into debt or made significant financial sacrifices to afford the payments they believed were necessary for their children's athletic development. The coach claimed that additional payments were voluntary contributions to support team activities and that playing time was determined by performance and attitude during practice. However, investigation revealed clear correlation between payment amounts and playing time allocation that couldn't be explained by athletic merit or team contribution. The father had to involve league administration and other parents to document the corruption that was undermining the fundamental principles of youth sports and equal opportunity for athletic development. Our 28th story involves a woman who found out that her home security company technician had been disabling certain security features during installation and maintenance visits, then sharing information about security vulnerabilities with criminal associates who would later burglarize the homes. The technician had been working for the security company for over 2 years and had access to dozens of homes throughout the community where he installed and maintained alarm systems. However, the woman became suspicious when her home was burglarized despite having a supposedly comprehensive security system, and when the burglars seemed to know exactly how to avoid triggering alarms and cameras. Investigation revealed that the technician had been deliberately creating security vulnerabilities during his service visits, including disabling motion sensors, adjusting camera angles, and providing criminals with alarm codes and schedules of when homeowners would be away. He had been using his legitimate access to homes and security systems to gather intelligence for criminal associates who would later use the information to commit targeted burglaries. The technician had been particularly targeting homes with valuable items that he observed during his security work, essentially using his professional role to case potential targets for criminal activity. Some of the burglaries had been sophisticated operations that avoided detection because the criminals knew exactly which security features had been disabled and how to navigate around remaining protective measures. The scheme had been affecting multiple neighborhoods over several years, with the technician building trust as a security professional while actually creating vulnerabilities that endangered homeowners' safety and property. When the woman demanded that the security company investigate her system's failure to detect the burglary, they discovered evidence of tampering that could only have been done by someone with technical knowledge and legitimate access. The technician claimed that security system malfunctions were common and that burglars were becoming more sophisticated in their methods. but couldn't explain why multiple systems he had worked on had failed in similar ways during burglaries. The woman had to work with law enforcement and the security company to investigate the insider threat that had compromised community safety and resulted in multiple criminal violations. Our 29th story comes from a man who discovered that his lawn care service owner had been using his property and other clients' yards to illegally dump construction debris and hazardous materials, essentially running an unlicensed waste disposal operation while charging for landscaping services. The lawn care service had been maintaining his property for over a year and had provided reliable grass cutting and basic landscaping that kept his yard looking neat and well-maintained. However, the man became suspicious when he noticed unusual changes in soil quality and when plants in certain areas of his yard began dying despite adequate watering and care. Investigation revealed that the lawn care owner had been bringing construction debris, chemical waste, and other hazardous materials to client properties and burying them in flower beds, compost areas, and less visible parts of yards. He had been charging construction companies and contractors to dispose of their waste illegally, while using client properties as free dumping grounds that avoided the costs and regulations of proper waste disposal facilities. The illegal dumping had been contaminating soil and groundwater, while potentially exposing families and pets to dangerous chemicals and materials that could cause health problems. Some of the dumped materials had included asbestos, lead-based paint chips, and industrial chemicals that required special handling and disposal according to environmental protection laws. The scheme had been affecting multiple properties over several years, with the lawn care owner essentially using client trust and property access to run a criminal waste disposal operation. When the man had his soil tested by environmental specialists, they confirmed contamination levels that exceeded safe limits and that posed ongoing health risks for anyone using the affected areas. The lawn care owner claimed that he occasionally brought organic compost materials to improve soil quality and that any contamination must have come from other sources. However, investigation revealed that he had been systematically using client properties for illegal waste disposal while collecting payment from both landscaping clients and waste generators. The man had to involve environmental protection agencies and law enforcement to address the contamination that had endangered his family's health and property value. Our 30th story involves a woman who found out that her child's school bus driver had been making unauthorized stops to run personal errands while children were on the bus, including stops at bars, convenience stores, and residential locations that violated safety protocols and transportation regulations. The driver had been transporting children to and from school for over 2 years and had initially seemed responsible and safety conscious in his interactions with students and parents. However, the woman became concerned when her child mentioned unusual stops during the bus route and when she noticed that arrival times were becoming increasingly unpredictable. Investigation revealed that the driver had been regularly making personal stops while children were on the bus, including visits to stores, bars, and private residences that had nothing to do with the official school transportation route. He had been leaving children unattended on the bus while he conducted personal business, sometimes for extended periods that put students at risk if emergencies had occurred. The driver had been particularly careless about making stops at establishments that served alcohol, potentially exposing children to inappropriate environments and putting them at risk if he had been drinking during school hours. Some of the unauthorized stops had involved meetings with friends and associates that could have exposed children to dangerous or inappropriate people who had no business being around school transportation. The scheme had been affecting multiple bus routes over several years, with the driver essentially using school transportation resources for personal convenience while endangering student safety. When the woman investigated further, she discovered that other parents had noticed similar problems but had assumed that route changes were authorized by school administration. The driver claimed that occasional stops were necessary for vehicle maintenance and that route timing was affected by traffic conditions beyond his control. However, investigation revealed that the stops were clearly personal in nature and that children had been exposed to unnecessary risks due to his violation of transportation safety protocols. The woman had to involve school administration and transportation authorities to address the safety violations that had put multiple children at risk during their daily commute. Our 31st story comes from a father who discovered that his daughter's dance instructor had been choreographing routines that were inappropriate for children and posting videos of the performances online without parental consent. essentially exploiting young dancers for adult entertainment content. The instructor had been teaching at the dance studio for several years and had a reputation for creating competitive routines that showcased students' technical skills and artistic development. However, the father became concerned when he noticed that some of the choreography seemed overly mature and when other parents mentioned feeling uncomfortable with certain costume choices and movement styles. Investigation revealed that the instructor had been deliberately creating dance routines with suggestive movements and themes that were inappropriate for the ages of the student performers, then filming the performances and sharing them on adult-oriented websites and social media platforms. She had been marketing the content to audiences who were specifically interested in watching children perform in ways that could be considered exploitative and inappropriate. The instructor had been gradually pushing boundaries with choreography and costumes, testing how much she could get away with before parents or studio management noticed and objected. Some of the online content had been monetized through subscription services and advertising revenue, meaning that the instructor was profiting from the exploitation of child performers without their knowledge or consent. The scheme had been affecting multiple dance classes over several years, with young dancers being exposed to inappropriate content creation while believing they were simply participating in normal dance education and performance opportunities. When the father demanded to see all videos and online content featuring his daughter, the instructor became defensive and claimed that dance was an art form that required emotional expression and that parents were being overly protective. However, investigation revealed that the content being created and shared was clearly inappropriate for children, and that the instructor had been deliberately targeting audiences with questionable interests in child performers. The father had to involve both studio management and child protection services to address the exploitation that was using dance education as a cover for inappropriate content creation. Our 30-second story involves a woman who found out that her elderly father's handyman had been convincing him that expensive home repairs were urgently needed while actually creating the problems himself during previous visits, essentially running a scam that generated continuous repair work and revenue. The handyman had been working with her father for over a year, providing various maintenance and repair services that seemed to keep the elderly man's house in good condition. However, the woman became suspicious when her father seemed to need constant expensive repairs despite having recently paid for major improvements and maintenance work. Investigation revealed that the handyman had been deliberately creating problems during his service visits, including loosening pipes, damaging electrical connections, and weakening structural elements that would require future repair work. He had been using his access to the house and the elderly man's trust to sabotage systems and create maintenance issues that only he would be able to identify and fix. The handyman had been particularly targeting problems that could pose safety risks, using fear tactics about potential dangers to pressure the elderly man into authorizing expensive emergency repairs. Some of the created problems had included water damage from loosened plumbing connections and electrical hazards from deliberately damaged wiring that could have seriously endangered the elderly man's safety. The scheme had been generating thousands of dollars in unnecessary repair costs over several months, with the handyman essentially using the elderly man's home as a source of continuous fraudulent income. When the woman hired an independent contractor to assess her father's repair needs, they discovered evidence of deliberate sabotage and confirmed that many of the recent problems had been artificially created. The handyman claimed that old houses naturally developed problems and that preventive maintenance required ongoing attention and investment. However, he couldn't explain why problems consistently appeared in areas he had recently worked on or why his repairs seemed to create new issues rather than solving existing ones. The woman had to involve elder abuse authorities and law enforcement to address the fraud that had been exploiting her father's trust and endangering his safety. Our 33rd story comes from a man who discovered that his apartment building's maintenance coordinator had been entering tenants' units without permission to steal mail, packages, and personal items while residents were at work, using his master key access to commit systematic theft throughout the building. The coordinator had been working for the building management company for over 3 years and was trusted by residents to handle legitimate maintenance requests and emergency repairs. However, the man became suspicious when several valuable packages showed as delivered but never arrived, and when he noticed that personal items seemed to be missing from his apartment after maintenance visits. Investigation revealed that the coordinator had been using his legitimate access to tenant units to steal mail, packages, and valuable items that residents wouldn't immediately notice were missing. He had been particularly targeting apartments where residents worked regular schedules, timing his thefts to avoid detection while making his activities appear to be routine maintenance work. The coordinator had been selling stolen items online and through local resale shops, generating significant income from his systematic theft of tenant property. Some of the stolen items had included prescription medications, financial documents, and personal electronics that created privacy and security risks for victims beyond the financial losses. The scheme had been affecting dozens of tenants over several years, with the coordinator using his position of trust and access to commit crimes that violated residents' sense of safety and security in their own homes. When the man installed hidden cameras in his apartment, he captured evidence of the coordinator entering without permission and taking items that had nothing to do with maintenance or repairs. The coordinator claimed that he was performing routine inspections and that any missing items must have been lost or stolen by other people with access to the building. However, investigation revealed that stolen property had been found in his possession and that he had been systematically targeting multiple units for theft rather than performing legitimate maintenance work. The man had to work with other tenants and law enforcement to document the crimes that had been committed by someone who was supposed to protect their property and safety. Our 34th story involves a woman who found out that her pet groomer had been using her dog and other clients' pets for breeding purposes without owner knowledge or consent, essentially running an unlicensed puppy mill operation using pets that were brought in for grooming services. The groomer had been providing excellent grooming services for over 2 years and had built a reputation for gentle handling and professional care of pets throughout the community. However, the woman became concerned when her female dog seemed unusually tired and stressed after grooming appointments, and when she noticed physical changes that suggested her pet might have been bred recently. Investigation revealed that the groomer had been using male and female dogs brought in for grooming to breed puppies that she then sold through online advertisements and pet stores. She had been keeping detailed records of pets' breeding cycles and health information to optimize her illegal breeding operation while maintaining the appearance of providing normal grooming services. The groomer had been particularly targeting purebred dogs and popular designer breeds that would produce valuable puppies for resale in the commercial pet market. Some of the unauthorized breeding had exposed pets to health risks and stress that their owners had never consented to, while potentially affecting the animal's behavior and well-being. The scheme had been affecting multiple pets over several years, with the groomer essentially using client trust and pet care services as a cover for an unlicensed commercial breeding operation. When the woman demanded veterinary examination of her dog, the results confirmed recent breeding activity that could only have occurred during grooming appointments. The groomer claimed that pets sometimes showed signs of stress from grooming procedures and that any behavioral changes were temporary reactions to bathing and handling. However, investigation revealed breeding equipment and puppy sales records that clearly demonstrated the unauthorized use of client pets for commercial reproduction. The woman had to involve animal control authorities and veterinary professionals to address the exploitation that had used pet grooming services as a cover for illegal breeding activities. Our 35th story comes from a father who discovered that his son's martial arts instructor had been teaching dangerous and illegal fighting techniques while encouraging students to use violence to solve conflicts outside the training facility, essentially promoting criminal behavior under the guise of self-defense education. The instructor had been running the martial arts school for several years and had marketed his programs as character-building activities that taught discipline, respect, and appropriate self-defense skills. However, the father became concerned when his son started talking about fighting techniques that seemed designed to cause serious injury rather than defensive protection, and when the boy's attitude toward conflict resolution became increasingly aggressive. Investigation revealed that the instructor had been teaching techniques specifically designed to inflict maximum damage on opponents, including methods that could cause permanent injury or death if used outside controlled training environments. He had been encouraging students to seek out confrontations and to use their training to intimidate and harm other people rather than using martial arts skills responsibly for fitness and self-protection. The instructor had been glorifying violence and criminal behavior while undermining the traditional values of martial arts training that emphasized discipline, control, and peaceful conflict resolution. Some of the techniques being taught were illegal to use outside of legitimate self-defense situations and could result in serious criminal charges for students who followed the instructor's guidance. The scheme had been affecting multiple students over several years, with young people receiving training that could lead them into legal trouble and that promoted violence as a solution to personal and social problems. When the father investigated the instructor's background, he discovered previous criminal convictions for assault and other violent crimes that raised serious questions about his suitability to teach children and teenagers. The instructor claimed that effective self-defense required aggressive techniques and that students needed to be prepared to handle real-world violence. However, investigation revealed that he had been specifically encouraging illegal behavior and that his teaching methods violated both martial arts ethics and community safety standards. The father had to remove his son from the program and warn other parents about the dangerous and illegal instruction that was being disguised as legitimate martial arts education. Our final story involves a woman who found out that her financial advisor had been deliberately providing bad investment advice to elderly clients so that their portfolios would lose value, allowing him to charge additional fees for recovery services while also steering clients toward expensive financial products that generated high commissions. The advisor had been working with seniors in the community for several years and had marketed himself as someone who specialized in retirement planning and wealth preservation for older adults. However, the woman became suspicious when her elderly mother's investment portfolio continued to decline despite supposedly expert management and favorable market conditions. Investigation revealed that the advisor had been systematically recommending investments that he knew would perform poorly, including overpriced mutual funds, risky securities, and financial products with hidden fees and poor historical performance. He had been deliberately sabotaging clients' financial security to create ongoing dependency on his services and to justify expensive recovery and restructuring plans that generated additional revenue. The advisor had been particularly targeting elderly clients who trusted his expertise and who were unlikely to seek second opinions or carefully monitor their investment performance on their own. Some of the bad advice had resulted in significant losses that endangered clients' retirement security and ability to afford necessary healthcare and living expenses. The scheme had been designed to create a cycle of dependency where clients needed ongoing expensive services to recover from problems that the advisor had deliberately created through poor recommendations. When the woman hired an independent financial analyst to review her mother's portfolio, they confirmed that the investment choices had been consistently inappropriate and that the poor performance was due to deliberate mismanagement rather than market conditions. The advisor claimed that investing involved risks and that he was providing conservative guidance appropriate for elderly clients' risk tolerance and financial goals. However, investigation revealed that his recommendations consistently favored high-commission products over better-performing alternatives and that his clients were experiencing losses at rates far above market averages. The woman had to involve financial regulators and help her mother transfer to a fee-only advisor who could provide honest guidance focused on her actual financial interests rather than generating revenue through deliberate mismanagement. That concludes tonight's extended collection of 36 stories, from personal betrayals and professional fraud to systematic exploitation of trust and authority. These situations remind us how important it is to stay vigilant about the people we allow into our lives and to question motives when something doesn't feel right, even when dealing with professionals and authority figures we're supposed to trust. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you tomorrow night with more fascinating tales from Reddit.